So for today's training, I am going to cover accessibility, particularly as we are looking at creating content for OER. So I'm going to go over the WCAG 2.1 guidelines. We're going to look at Word, PowerPoint, PDF, Canvas, and of course, LibreText. So the first thing we are going to talk about is the four principles of accessibility. So the four principles of accessibility coming out of the World Wide Web Consortium, otherwise known as W3C, developed the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, otherwise known as WCAG. And we are in the 2.1 version. The 2.1 version is effective April the 24th, 2026. So all institutions such as State Center Community College must adhere to those standards. So the WCAG identifies four principles of accessibility. This is just a baseline for when creating content. 2.1 is the updated version, and we, by law, have to meet the AA standard. So this sets up the idea of what is perceivable. So this would be where users must be able to perceive the information that is being delivered. So is it accessible via sense, such as touch, hearing, or also sight? It also has to be operable as well. So what that means is you are able to use keyboard keys, so like the up arrow, down arrow, left, right, in order to navigate, including hotkeys. This would be for people who are not able to use a mouse or a touchpad. The next thing is understandable. So you want to make sure that the content and the interface is presented in such a manner that student will actually be able to get that information. I just realized I was muted, or my audio was muted, so I couldn't hear anything. So in terms of understandable, if you're providing like images, for instance, a screen reader will be able to identify it. And try not to use unfamiliar terms. And if it is an introduction to those terms, make sure to provide some definition to it. So this could be as part of a glossary. Another consideration is robust. The content must be accessible and be able to be interpreted by a variety of assistive technologies. So here at State Center Community College, depending on the college, some of the colleges, such as Fresno City, uses Cursewell as a screen reading software. And at Madera Community College, we are actually using Speechify, which is a scan and read. These are for students that have recognized accommodations. We also use Genio as well, which are some of the accessibility tools that we have. Genio is a note-taking software. So what it is it does an auto caption, just like what is happening right now in this session. Genio will also do that for the student. And at the end, it will actually provide a note file that has all that information. Right now, we have an audio transcript that's happening. So the reason why we have to be mindful of the new ADA guidelines is because we are required to adhere to these standards. So everything that we produce in terms of content, particularly those that are electronic or accessed via web, has to meet the Title II guidelines, otherwise identified as the WCAG 2.1. What that means is any information that we are provided, whether it's a user interface with a computer, an iPad, a tablet, or a laptop, it has to have certain standards to ensure that everybody has equal access to that information. So in this case, the rule just clarifies obligations that we explicitly have to apply, particularly now in the age of digital platforms. We have to be mindful of how students are using these devices and making sure that the content that we are creating actually meets these standards, such as we should not be restricting the view of the information that we are posting. It should be able to be rotated, whether it's portrait or landscape, to help a student be able to use that information. So if you've ever used the Canvas app on your phone, It's kind of hard to read some of that information if it's in portrait mode. So the idea is being able to shift it to a landscape mode to help better see that screen size. Also being able to zoom. So for us who are using touch screens, for instance, being able to zoom it up to 400% without requiring a 2D scrolling is another guideline that we have to adhere to. It also looks at the non-text contrast, content on hover or focus, pointer gestures, for instance. So are you requesting it to be pinching? Can it be operated simply by just clicking or tapping on it? So I'm not going to go through all of the updated standards. Just know that the WCAG 2.1 is the standard we have to adhere to. We need to meet the minimum standard, which is level A. We also need to meet the minimum standard, which is double A. So it's building off of the A value into the double A because that is where we are at with the federal guidelines. There is also a triple A standard for WCAG that is aspirational. We are not legally obligated to meet that, but it is a good goal to head that way. So what I mean by aspirational with like the triple A, like right now, you guys can see the PowerPoint, you could see the auto transcribe that's happening. It's not 100% accurate. The idea is with the AAA standard is I have a live person who is actually doing those captions for me and not relying on AI to do it. Another example of a AAA standard is if you are showing a video, the video landscape or whatever is being seen is also being described in that scenario by meeting AAA standards. But we are not adhered to that, but we do have to meet the minimum guidelines of double A. This particular slide, I will post the link to it in the chat at the end of the presentation. So you have access to the information because there are some built-in hyperlinks within this presentation. So the trick about accessibility to make your life a lot easier is making sure as you are sitting down to create content, you have accessibility in mind. This will save you a lot of time and effort at the back end instead of looking at existing documentation and then having to remediate it. Because remediation can take longer if you're not aware of how to do it in whichever platform it is that you're using. So when we're looking at creating accessible documents, one of the things that we have to adhere to is making sure that however they are accessing the documentation, whether it's through Word, PowerPoint, Excel, PDFs, LibreText, for instance, that we always check the accessibility to make sure within those platforms we're using the tools that are available. When we are providing alternative text for images, are they pertinent? Are they important? Or is it for decorative purposes? When we're providing out hyperlinks, there is a distinction if we are going to be providing printed copies versus digital copies and how that looks. And then also making sure that closed captions and transcripts for all videos are available. For Madara, Readly, and Clovis, we have Panopto, which is our video recording software. It does do auto captioning. It is actually fairly accurate, but it is still our job to go in and remediate those, because in some cases, they might not necessarily be able to identify what that word is, especially if it's like a difficult term. Or if it's like me, when I'm tired or really excited, I speak really fast. My speech gets kind of messed up that it doesn't necessarily pick up the words that I'm trying to say. If we are providing audio files, we want to make sure that we also do transcripts. For Panopto, it can actually allow you to download audio transcripts from that video. Canvas Studio also does that too. There is a way to remediate those within Canvas as well. So if you're not quite sure how to work those tools, please make sure to make an appointment with your instructional designer on campus so you can get training on how to use those tools. So really when we're talking about being able to use the tools effectively is knowing what is available to us. So in any Microsoft product, whether it's Word, PowerPoint, Excel, We need to know how the rich content editor works. And it's fairly straightforward. If you can do it in Word, that skill set is very much transitory in terms of PowerPoint and also Excel. The idea is being familiar with how to use the rich content editor. So some things to consider as you're thinking about how to structure your information, think about how you want it to logically flow. So what does the structure look like? Do you have main big goals, and then do you have subpoints within it? If it's a really large content, it might be a good idea to try and see how to divide those out and using the appropriate level headings. Headings will allow a screen reader to actually identify the areas in your document. So kind of like a table of contents. It will actually read level heading 1, this particular tag. Level heading 2, this particular tag. It allows the student who is using a screen reader to basically jump around whichever section it is that they need to get into. When we're looking at creating line and paragraph spacing, knowing the tools to use, it will allow us to create an image of a space gap without actually using the return button or enter button to create that space. Because what happens is when we hit space, 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 space to create a big gap, the screen reader will actually read those extra spaces. So idea is we are trying to navigate it to the simplest possible. Now, in some cases, a student might be using their number or their touchpad, or not touchpad, their keypad, so the up arrows, down arrows. The idea of being able to properly space it using the spacing feature will allow a student to navigate to the next line by hitting the down arrow once instead of multiple times to get to that next line. If you are wanting to emphasize a point, I like colors. My math students know that I like to color stuff. But that's not the way that you should do if you're trying to emphasize a point, because people who are colorblind will not see those colors. And the vast majority of those that are colorblind are males, so just be mindful of your audience. They might not even know that they're not, that they can't see color. My first year here at Madera Community College, my PowerPoint slides, I used color to identify main points. I used green. It was a dark green, but still green nonetheless. And I had a student come up to me after the first exam and ask me, what can I do to help me study better for the next exam? And I basically was a little baffled. And I asked the student, weren't you not able to get the terms that I had identified in the PowerPoint slides in green? He did not know he could not see green. I did not know he was colorblind. I made the assumption that everybody can see color. And so he missed out on key information that I had given other students to help them study. So if you are going to want to emphasize certain things, try to use alternative formats such as bolding or underline, although underline's a little bit questionable, especially with URL. So honestly, the safest one is bold. Italics can get a little iffy if they're having issues in terms of like navigating those cursive type images. So let's get familiarized with our tools here. Just want to make sure that you guys can see my mouse. Okay. So in the styles area, I am in the home tab. This will allow you to click on the headings and then identify the headings. So you have to use the headings in order. Heading level 1 indicates a big area, and a subpoint of level heading 1 is 2. A subpoint of level heading 2 is 3. The idea is you're using the proper heading levels and you're not jumping. So if I have level heading 1 and then I have content, and then my next level heading is 3, that's not going to be accessible in terms of the accessibility check. So just be mindful of that. So if you're going to use headings, make sure you are using it in appropriate levels. So starting off with 1, if 1 needs a subpoint, then you do 2. If 2 needs more subpoints, then you do 3. Or it could be just level heading 1, then a level heading 1. That particular second level heading 1, maybe you'll have a sub-level heading 2. and then you'll have a level heading 1 again, and then maybe that second level might have level heading 3s. So just make sure that you're using that in order. So when I talk about line spacing, use this tool. It will allow you to create space before or after. Typically, when we're looking at written content, double space is good if we want them to be able to write within the margins. At the minimum, 1.5 spacing in between the lines is really helpful. But if you want to convey space between like separate topic information, use the line space break between or after. And I'll show you how to do that in a Word file. You can also convey meaning by increasing text sizes too, so I think we're familiar with that one. So some things to consider when creating accessible documents. When we're looking at lists, so there are two forms of lists. We can either do a bulleted form or we can do a numbered form. All of that is identifiable in the paragraph. So using bullets will list things that basically indicate that there is no order of importance. It's just points. If there is an order of importance, they have to do this step first, then this step, then this step. Then you use the number listing, because then it basically says 1, da 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 da, 2, da 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 da, 3, da da da. So it tells that person, okay, I got to do 1 first, then I got to move to 2, then I got to move to 3, then I got to move to 4. If you have like a hierarchy where is step 1A, step 2A, step 2A, B, then you might want to use the hierarchy in terms of the labeling. This will help with the screen reader look for the logic in what it is that you are presenting. Keep tables simple. Creating tables within the table feature of Microsoft Word is really helpful. Same with PowerPoint. It allows you to create tables within it. Try to avoid subdividing columns or rows or merging it because the screen reader is not really going to know how to treat that. Because when we're talking about tables, either the rows are the main points or the columns are the main points, and that's how it's organized, or it could be heading and also columns. So make sure you are using table features if you want to organize things in a clear fashion instead of using tabs or spaces. Because what would happen is with a screen reader, it will actually read out loud, space, 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 tab, 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 or if they're using the arrow keys on their keyboard, it's multiple clicks to get to that new information. So when we're using and we want to organize our content to make it visibly pretty. So like if I do psychosocial stages of development, for instance, I want to definitely identify the positives, the negatives when there are issues, and then the developmental milestones. So I want to make sure it is pretty in a table, but I want to make sure that it is also accessible too. With tables, you do also have to create an alt text to identify what kind of table it is. The screen reader will read the contents of the table, but it's always good to identify the alt text. What is that table? Because then the screen reader would say, table, Piaget psychosocial development, and then it'll read the contents of that table. Definitely designate a header as a row or your column as a row, depending on how it is that you want it to be navigated. So don't use tables to simulate layouts to position graphic elements on the page, because then it will tell table. I did this when I wanted to be fancy with my canvas. I had a lot of like images that I wanted like in an organized fashion. So I created what I called invisible tables, basically tables that did not have those black boxes around it. But it actually was not really accessible. It wasn't user friendly. If I'm thinking of somebody with a disability, while visually for a person, it looks pretty, in terms of navigation, it was absolutely useless. And it just made it a lot more difficult to navigate the material that I want them to get into. So formatting is really important. Instead of using like space bars or tabs to get something centered, make sure that you are using the appropriate center guide, whether it's left justified, center justified, or right justified, depending on your um, what you want to visually convey, but use those appropriate tools in terms of formatting. In terms of font style, sans serif family is the go-to accessible, friendly style. So like Arial, Courier New, for instance, those are really good accessible text styles. The cursive ones, don't ever use those because people are going to struggle reading those. So in terms of color, be mindful of color blindness, especially when you like, I like pretty things. However, if you're trying to use the prettiness of it, a person who is colorblind cannot see those. So please be mindful of that. Same with tables, charts, and graphs. Think about either, do you want a color version to highlight like the different bar charts, for instance, or do you want to use texture gradient to highlight that there are differences? So consider the audience. And if you want that pretty version, but you also want an accessible version, you might want to consider maybe creating two tables, or worst case scenario, if it's a bar graph, you can put the data at the bottom of the data table as well. So slide decks are really helpful knowing how to use your PowerPoint and the built-in features associated with it. So use the slide templates that is available. If you want more content, if you insert a text box, it's not going to know how to read it as in like the order. So you also need to double check the reading order of that. It makes things a little bit more complicated. So when you go into the slide deck, check the master slides. If you're not even going to worry about that, just check to make sure that you are using the appropriate layouts in PowerPoint. If you're trying to create a table within PowerPoint, use that table feature that says insert table. If you're going to do like a smart chart, like an org chart, for instance, use the features that is already built in. The way that Microsoft has it, those built-in features already have some accessibility within them. So it will help in terms of making your stuff accessible. When you are creating PowerPoints, one of the things to have to be mindful of is color contrast. If you have a dark background and a dark text, people are not going to be able to see that information as clear. So be extra careful in terms of your text coloring. And we can use WebAIM color check or Wave, which is an added tool in Chrome to check for color contrast. So like for instance, my slide deck right now is coming out of the Madeira colors. The original green that you see here was actually Maddie's color. Maddie's eye color is very light green. And when I did the tools within PowerPoint, there was an option that helped format for row and heading as a header that had a light green color. But from a color contrast standpoint, it did not work. So while the tools are great, in some cases they are not perfect because in this case, the PowerPoint does not check all color templates to make sure that it is accessible. So just be mindful of that. You still do need to have a manual check on it. So navigation, just be mindful of how you create content, how you set up your styles ribbon, because the idea is you are able to navigate that content using your arrow keys. And then when we are providing large chunks of data, please make sure to condense it or not necessarily having to condense it, but maybe put some chunking into it and using appropriate level headings so it's not so overwhelming. And it's not just a screen reader drawing on for hours and hours and hours without a break, or it doesn't say like next section. So running an accessibility checker after everything that you've done is a good way to check to make sure your things are accessible. So typically what I like to do is write my content in Word, do the remediations as I'm working along using the appropriate tools that are available to me in Word itself, and then run the accessibility checker. The cool part is when you run the accessibility checker, if there are issues, the right-hand side will open up and then it will actually give you some guidelines to help you remediate whatever issue it is with accessibility. Then what you can do is from a Word doc, convert it to a PDF file by save as PDF, and then make sure that you're running the accessibility checker as well on Adobe. And the accessibility checker, when you do it in Word first and then Adobe, simplifies the process. The remediation is not as cumbersome as actually just having not created it in Word and then having to do the remediation in PDF. It is very doable. It's just really clunky. So if you have existing files that you have converted to PDF, definitely run the accessibility checker. You might even consider, should I convert this to a Word file, fix it in Word, and then convert it back to a PDF? Or can I just remediate in PDF and be okay with it? Depends on the number of issues, depends on the length of the document. So that's actually your choice. So running accessibility on Word is the same process as running accessibility in PowerPoint. The difference between the two in PowerPoint, it will tell you to just confirm the reading order of how you would like things to go, especially when you're adding like an image or you're adding a text box. In Word, not an issue in terms of reading order. So the next thing I want to highlight is descriptive course content. So using alternative text and also descriptive hyperlinks. So when we are looking at creating alternative text, the idea is this is a written description of an image. So somebody who cannot see the screen reader will tell you or will describe what that image is. The idea is you're using an image to convey information. Um, if it's for decorative, then just mark it as decorative. So when you are looking at creating a description for an image, think about what you want a visual person to get out of that image. So you want to communicate that in the alt text by providing the content, context, conciseness, and function. So you want to make sure that the information that you are providing in in an image is accessible by everyone because some images present a serious barrier to access by users with visual disabilities because a screen reader cannot interpret images. Artificial intelligence is interesting, but it cannot actually describe the image. So on my phone, for instance, I use voice to text a lot. I will have somebody send me a screenshot, an image of something. Sometimes it describes it, image of a dog. I'm like, oh, okay. Or sometimes it just says image. So screen readers will also have that same issue. So be mindful of that. Even though there is AI available, it really has not done a really good job at describing it, but we can use AI to help us create an alt text if we need to. So there are four types of images to be mindful of. So first one is it just for decoration? The idea is those who are visually able just have something pretty to break up the monotony of like a black or white text. If that is the case, it's just for decoration, then mark it as decorative. So for instance, right now, my PowerPoint, the Open Education Resources image is marked as a decorative image because it's just there for pretty. If it requires a function, so the idea is it initiates an action, you want to make sure that in your alt text, it describes it. So for instance, in my Canvas class, I have a button that says click here to get to class. It's an image. Visual students can see that. They know I'm going to click here. I'm going to be able to get into the class modules. For those who are using a screen reader, they are not going to be able to see that unless in my alt text I say, click here to get into the class. I don't say image, click here to get into the class, because otherwise it will be a redundant. It will say image, image, click here to get into the class. So just be mindful of your alt text. If you're trying to initiate a function, make sure that it is provided in the alt text. If it's simple, informative, the idea is having between 125 to 150 characters max, because you just want to have a precise description of it. Um, a good way to think about it is, can I put it in a tweet? In Canvas, when we run our accessibility checker, it does actually limit us to the number of characters. Otherwise, it will not pass the accessibility check. So be mindful of that. If you are using complex informative, like an infographic, for instance, because there is a lot of information that it looks really good in an infographic, you want to make sure somebody who has a screen reader can see it. So there are a couple of ways to do it. So if you want to convey the information that is in the infographic, you can actually either like put the infographic in like a box border and then put the text description at the bottom so it's just tied there. So then the alt text would be infographic of uh, fishes. And then in the text description, it actually identifies bass looks like da 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 da. Salmon looks like da 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 da. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you can have the image there. You can then put in a hyperlink that will take it to a different page that will actually go through the actual content of it. So if you're building it in Canvas, that is a really good way to just have that image and then in the alt text, click the image for a description of the information, and then it will send them to a page in Canvas. If you are writing it in Word or in LibreText, you can put it as part of like the references or an appendix section. It's still within that same chapter, but it's just at the bottom. So when we're looking at alt text, this is really what you're trying to convey. In this particular image, you can just describe the desert or arid desert or desert rock formation. If you're a geologist, you might want to be a little bit more specific in terms of your description of it. So it really depends on what you are trying to describe. The idea is you are wanting to convey the meaning when we're talking about the description. So when we're looking at how to write an effective alt text, just be mindful of what is the purpose of the image. So include the context of the picture. How does it relate to the page, where it applies? What does it illustrate? Don't use words like image, picture, or click unless it's that function image that you're trying to do, because otherwise the screen reader will read that double. Be succinct in your alt text. The idea is you don't want it to be long because then the message can get lost. If it's purely decorative, mark it as decorative. And you can do that whether it's in PowerPoint, Word, or also in Canvas. Don't repeat the same alt text for multiple images because otherwise you've lost meaning. So if I'm looking at the developmental cycles, comparing the different theories of developmental milestones, I'm going to specify for each table. Piaget, developmental stages, Erikson, psychosocial stages. So it knows that they are different images. And any legible text on an image must appear in the alt text. So when we're looking at infographics, be really, really careful. Is this something that I really want to convey in an infographic, or are there other ways to convey it? So that's kind of something to be mindful of. I love infographics. I do infographics when I hand out information to people. In terms of digitally, I have a love-hate relationship of it. I love it because it's for those who are visually able, they can readily see it. For making sure that it is accessible, I know I have a lot of work to do to make sure that it is remediated. So you might have to be really, really careful of how and what you're doing. And one of the things also with infographics is please making sure that the color contrast is there as well. So the Wave in color contrast checker is available. And again, at the end of the presentation, I'm going to send out the link to this so you have the information, including the hyperlinks. So descriptive hyperlinks are really interesting, especially in the days of us sending a lot of information via the web, email, Canvas. We want to make sure that we are providing descriptive hyperlinks instead of putting in the HTTPS address. So descriptive hyperlinks contain keywords that describe the link destination. In a screen reader, when we have a descriptive link, it will actually notify the person using the screen reader that it is a hyperlink. So you don't have to actually say, click here for a hyperlink. It will already say, hyperlink, ASCCC accessibility resource. And that's what we want. Instead of actually the screen reader saying https://ASCCC, and it's a very robotic voice, it's kind of, ugh. You don't want it to read the URL address. So you want to make sure when you're creating a descriptive link that it's the keywords that you have selected, and then you did a right click, insert the hyperlink. Click here, it's going to say hyperlink. Click here to review. It will miss the context of it. So avoid that as well. If you are creating content that will be going out in a electronic form, but also in a printed form, you might want to make two, actually not might, you will need to make two versions. So a printed version will need to have the complete URL because they don't have a digital access to it. They need to be able to find that website. So it needs to be printed. So I usually have like a printed form, and then I'll have a electronic form. The electronic form does not need the HTTPS written out because otherwise it's going to be redundant when the screen reader use it. Using descriptive hyperlinks is the best form to do it. So allow students to use keywords to search for documents. That's one thing that you could also do. Give more details to users with functioning vision who can scan for web pages. And then also provide context to individuals without function vision who use a screen reader or assistive technology to be able to get what it is that you're trying to get them to do. So let's talk about some accessibility features in Canvas. So the rich content editor does have an accessibility tool within Canvas itself. The idea is it detects common accessibility editor errors within Canvas itself. It's a little Michelangelo button when right below the text box. So always run it to make sure that it is accessible. So when it comes to Canvas, they are a little picky-ish in how you do the headings, but it's not as nitpicky compared to Pope Tech. And we can talk about Pope Tech here in just a second. It definitely checks for headings. Sometimes it picks issues up with headings, sometimes it does not. In the rich content editor, you can actually change the sizes of the headings if you want it to have one uniform look, or maybe heading one is just a little too big, so you want to like reduce it. So in terms of Canvas, if you look at the rich content editor in terms of the formatting, it starts at heading level 2. Heading level 1 is reserved for the title of that page because it helps the screen reader say this is a main point. Then it starts off with heading level 2, 3, and 4 or paragraph. If you're using level heading 2 and then you jump to 4, it does not like that. If you started off with level heading 3, sometimes it has an issue, sometimes it doesn't, but PubTech will definitely detect it. So much like Word, use the appropriate tools within the rich content editor to make those changes. So some things to be mindful of, large text contrast, larger than 18 pixels or bold 14 should display a minimum contrast ratio of a 3:1. Same concept with lists and bullets. You do actually have to adhere to those standards. Is it a listing, 1, 2, 3, or is it a bullet? When you create a table natively in Canvas, it will ask you to create basically what that table is. So instead of having to do an alt text, it just tells you what that table is to create a title for it. And then it will ask you, okay, how do you want it to organize? Is the headings the row? Or is it the column? or is it row and column? How do you want me to read this? And it also checks for color contrast as well. So here are some additional Canvas accessibility checkers to be mindful of. Making sure that you can use the heading features within Canvas and also the spacing to ensure that it is correct. And we are using also Pope Tech accessibility, which is free to us, is paid for by the California Community College Chancellor's Office. Please make sure to check that. That Pope Tech editor is close to the save button at the very, very bottom. There are two ways to use Pope Tech. You can check each page by hitting that Pope Tech button at the bottom, or you can actually toggle Pope Tech within your course navigation, make it visible, and then run the Pope Tech checker, and that will give you the information for your entire class and how it is accessible. Sometimes that can get a little overwhelming, but the interface has gotten better. And in PokeTech, once you remediate your page, it does take some time for it to be updated on the dashboard. So if you're wondering, hey, I had 5 errors, I fixed 4, why is it still showing 5 on the dashboard? It does take time for it to get refreshed. And I mean like a couple of days for it to get refreshed to show that you've remediated those 4 pages. In LibreText, they also do have its own accessibility content checker when you're doing it. So as you're writing content, you can do the accessibility checker. If you're ready for your project, like it's almost done, in the construction hub of LibreText, there's actually a tool called accessibility, and it will check the entire content that you have created for accessibility, not just that singular page. Okay. So in terms of resources, just a mindful check to make sure you are using the features available in Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and PDF, and you are checking accessibility. Making sure that your alternative text is available to all images. If it is truly decorative, then hit the decorative button. But if it's not decorative, please don't hit that decorative button just to get a good accessibility checker, because the question will become, why did you use that image? And if a student who is able to see that image can get meaning out of it, and it's not just something pretty, you basically disenfranchise somebody who is using a visual screen reader because they cannot get that same image information. For printed material, it is okay to have the HTTPS actually in the document. So when it's printed and shared, they have that website link. But if it's being transmitted digitally, whether it's a PowerPoint that is posted in Canvas, your Canvas page itself, or maybe information that you are creating in LibreText, that has to have descriptive hyperlinks. Your videos need to be closed caption and they need to be accurate. So there are tools available that will auto close caption, but it is still your responsibility to remediate them. So go in and edit. Panopto is really easy at editing because you can actually look at the entire transcript and then just make the changes as it goes along. I am not 100% sure how that works in Canvas Studio because I've never played around with it. And if you are going to be providing audio files, please make sure that there is also a transcript available for the students to be able to click and download. All right, that is a lot of stuff, but I'm going to actually shift a little bit and give you one. I want to give you the link to the PowerPoint. Share. If it's not apparent, I am actually a really huge supporter of Microsoft because they actually have some really good accessibility features. I just want to make sure anybody who has this link will have access to it. Okay. And you can always let me know if you are not able to access the PowerPoint. The cool part with Microsoft and the way that they actually have accessibility, it's better than Google, which I'm really grateful that we are a class that uses Microsoft. So this is an OER book that I wrote specifically in Microsoft Word. The reason why I like this is I can share a link out and have it where anybody can have access to it, and it allows for an immersive reader. The immersive reader will basically read the textbook to them. So they don't necessarily have to have DSPNS accommodations to be able to get access to a tool that will actually allow them to hear the material. This is really helpful for folks who might, like one of like that are struggling with reading, or maybe for them, they process information a little bit better by listening to it instead of by reading it. So with the immersive reader, Crime and Deviance. Much like the immersive reader in Canvas, it will actually read to them. It also has some interesting features as well, where it will allow you to change the style of the text, change the color contrast. My preference is black on white. I read better. And if you're seeing that I have color text, the reason why I have colored text is well, I have my grammar tool turned on. So if I was someone, and I am an ESL person, if I am still trying to learn parts of speech, I can actually toggle these in so it identifies for me what is a noun, what is a verb, what is an adverb, what are adjectives. Just kind of a fun tool. I normally also toggle the different language versions, but lately it hasn't been working all that well, which is really weird because it should actually translate it, but it's not. So I think there might be a hiccup with Microsoft. So in terms of the tools itself, when using your proper heading, it's really helpful because you can actually create like table of contents as well. Let me scroll to here. So in this case, this is level heading 1. Within that subpoint, I have 3, which are level heading 2s. And the screen reader will actually read those headings like a table of contents. So it will allow a student to basically be able to jump to that section. Let me switch it. There we go. So be familiar with how you want the students to actually navigate and the tools that you have. So in the Home tab, I can change my styles. I can do bullets. I can do spacing. Say I want to convey a space that is more than a double space between crime data and crime manifest. I can highlight that section, go into my line spacing area. Actually, let me switch out my screen and do it in a desktop version. The desktop version actually is a lot more user-friendly than the web version. Okay, yeah. I want to convey a space between my text box that highlights an image versus my text. So under paragraphs, I can go line spacing options, and then I can actually increase. And then it gives a gap, but I'm still able to use my up arrow instead of multiple times to go up and down to it. In LibreText, this is your accessibility checker, so make sure when you are creating content, it will check for all accessibility issues, and then hit OK, and then you'll come up with a report that says, here are the accessibility issues and how to fix them. All right, I think I went kind of fast because normally this is an hour long and I'm already pretty much where I need to be. Does anybody have any specific questions regarding accessibility? If not, I really appreciate your time here on a late Thursday, early night, late day for me because I should be home. I thank you so much. And then if you have any questions at all, please reach out to your instructional designers at your local campus. They do have some trainings available for faculty, particularly around accessibility. We are working as a district to get a tool for faculty to help remediate their content. It's called Juja. Hopefully, it will be rolling out soon because that will help a lot. Um, and then as a reminder, we have one more event here of Open Ed Week that will be tomorrow. See if I can insert that flyer in here. And then please make an appointment with your instructional designer or see what your colleges are offering for training. At Madera Community College, we are offering our faculty and staff training on accessibility every third Friday from 10:30 to 12. We have a room and Zoom live session available. This month, we are going to go a little bit more deeper using Microsoft Word and then going from Word to Adobe and then how to remediate Adobe files using Adobe Acrobat. If there aren't any questions, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys spending your time with me, and I hope you guys have a good night.